Thank you, Thomas. Thank you, Yuri. Thank you, Pille, and everyone behind the organization of this event. As it has been presented already throughout the day, the world is changing, and so are the ways, technologies, and standards against which things are measured. Matters of scale, distance, speed, labor, as well as notions of body, space, territory, environment, or world, have all come to take new forms and meanings over the last several decades of digital awakening. When thinking about space and digital reality, I would like to start with an elemental claim by media theorist and artist Sandy Stone. The discourse of visionary virtual world builders is rife with images of imaginal bodies, freed from the constraints that flesh imposes. Cyberspace developers foresee a time when they will be able to forget about the body. But it is important to remember that virtual community originates in and must return to the physical. Even in the age of the techno-social subject, life is lived through bodies. Spielberg, in his recent film Ready Player One, portrayed, not without falling into classic stereotypes, this duality between the virtual and the material world. A hyper-developed video game running parallel to a collapsing world, a city depicted as a sort of scrapyard where the material conditions of living are of extreme scarcity. In this short presentation, addressing the broad notions of space and digital reality, I would like to bring together two fundamental paradigms of our time, the urban age and the digital age. And particularly, I would like to look at the way they intersect each other, thus reshaping both the idea and the materiality of our contemporary world. I would try to do this by looking or addressing three questions: how the network-wired infrastructures change global territories and landscapes, how digital visualizations change our perception and image of the world, and how the production, collection, and processing of data is driven for whom and for what purposes, although I might have to skip some probably in part two. So information and communication technologies, so-called ICT, have been for a long time reconfiguring space-time relations, radically restructuring the materiality and spatiality of urban spaces, as well as the relationship between people and place, especially through a process of decentralization and delocalization, regionally and nationally, but also globally. Moreover, the conceptual space supported by ICT, that is cyberspace, has been extending social interaction through the provision of a new media that are increasingly reliant on spatial metaphors to enhance their operations. As geographers Dodge and Kitchen have pointed out, in their mapping of cyberspace, rather than being constrained by distance, we are increasingly constrained by a new geography of time which regulates access to people and resources. Extended processes of urbanization have essentially disrupted the modernist spatial logic. However, it has not dissolved, as anticipated, into a logic of spacesless. Manuel Castells has theorized about the emerging spatial division being formed where a new space of flows is overlaying and increasingly controlling an old space of places. In turn, rephrasing Dodge and Kitching again, traditional geographic space is being supplemented by a virtual space, allowing people and organizations to be more flexible in relation to real space geographies. Cybernetics have impacted world urbanization in both its extent and nature, and have propelled a decentralized wire web, node-based global urban system, giving rise to a new conceptual paradigm stemming from the notion of network, which has blown former spatial categories and scales, and so is the urban fabric and its associated economy of world information cities. Economies of scale can be transformed by information and communication technologies in their spatial logic. Argues Castells, electronic networks allow for the information of global assembly lines. software production can be spatially distributed and coordinated by communication networks. In this sense, the network consistently reflects the etymology of cyberspace, derived from the Greek kyber, that is, to navigate, literally meaning navigable space. The network is global because it has no limit. Cybernetic urbanization has tightened the bonds between geography and urbanism, between city and territory, a relation which by no means is new, but that takes another dimension in their overlaps and intensity, to the point of bringing some to argue, for instance, Claire Lister, that geography is no longer precursor for urbanism, the network is. The critique of the so-called city-centric narratives have given rise to a fascination with urbanization as a concept, considered the essential phenomenon in the restructuring of contemporary global conditions. It seems to have forgotten about its physical reality. Is the urban a tangible presence? Does it have a recognizable expression? Has it generated any identifiable pattern or principle of organization? Did digital technologies and cybernetic narratives provoke the emergence of a new material urbanity? Recent visualizations of the globe have moved from photography to remote sensing technology, large number of processed data collected by satellites. As Laura Cargan, a cartographer architect, points out, these projects were made possibly by an unfolded in reaction to a series of events over the last 2 decades that amount to a cataclysmic shift in our ability to navigate, inhabit, and define the spatial realm. These recent cartographies are constructing a wall imaginary as one single space, as an environmental totality, sometimes difficult to penetrate and somehow detached from the material basis on which it is sustained. Most prominent work developed by Urban Theory Lab and Neil Brenner, for instance. These recent cartographies, global imagery produced by digital technologies is reshaping the image of the world. In a reciprocal manner, virtual space is being urbanized as urban space is being virtualized. If the modern definition of the metropolitan life, of urban life, was paired with a high velocity of movement and circulation, a new condition has emerged over the last decades: being tracked down. Being in an urban environment equals being monitored and recorded, being exposed to a high level of data production and management. If the modern notion of the urban was constructed around technologies of circulation, digital cities are fundamentally based on the production, processing, and storing of data, which is clearly also a type of circulation, but it has grown into a full category in itself. According to contemporary thinker Bifo Berardi, the subjugation of natural chaos by the humanistic order of measurement was the crucial feature of the cultural colonization of the world by the Europeans. Big data is the apotheosis of measurement. According to Felix Stalder, what is new is precisely such large quantities of data, which, as we are promised or forwarded, will lead to a new knowledge, to a comprehensive understanding of the world, indeed to omniscience, so basically knowing everything. This faith in data is based above all on the fact that beneath or ahead of the social mechanisms of decentralized and network cultural production, there are algorithmic processes that pre-sort the immeasurably large volumes of data and convert them into a format that can be apprehended by individuals, evaluated by communities, and invested with meaning. Big data seeks to provide a much wider and in-depth real-time understanding and control of urbanity, hence transforming the city into a constellation of instruments across many scales, permanently connected to multiple networks, which provide continuous data regarding the movements and behaviors of people and materials. Real-time analytics aim to manage how a city functions and how it's regulated in a glorification of measurement, quantification and classification, thus giving rise to what has been called a metric culture, a metric colonization of life itself. This phenomena is obviously not new either. The rise of statistics was enormous during the 19th century. Philosopher of science Ian Hacking talks about an avalanche of numbers quantifying several aspects of life, such as health, work, or leisure. In this tradition, we could situate Ildefonso Cerdà and his general theory of urbanization of 1867. If most of the international attention gathered around the work of the Catalan engineer was typically focused on hygiene, circulation, and morphological unity, most important for the success of his theory as an intended theory of practice was the scientific and methodological organization of a territorial system, from the collection and production of data and statistics to the design of legal instruments of space management. In his monumental treatise, considered to be the foundation of modern urbanism as a field of knowledge, Cerdà drew on the Latin urbs, that is the physical ritual and legal constitution of the city, to coin the term urbanism, with the ambition to establish a scientific discipline that aimed to unite spatial and social development in a technological and political nature. We could say that arguably since 1867, the natural environment is conceptually reframed as an urban environment. And I'm gonna really skip that. The famous expression, ruralize the urban, urbanize the rural, replete terram, so fill the earth, appearing in the frontispiece of the first volume of the treatise, stated from the very first page a new understanding of the relation between the city and the countryside, that is, between architecture and nature. If the city was a space constituted in opposition to nature, the urban integrates nature in its constitutive whole. In other words, it becomes a nature itself. At present, when authors like Donna Haraway or Bruno Latour have shown us that nature, technology, and society are collapsing into each other, the work of Cerdà can be regarded as a visionary inasmuch it did anticipate the entanglement of environment walls we live in today. As a result of a planetary urban system, we find today that the aviation sector is responsible for the 2% of annual global emissions and one of the fastest growing pollutants, a fair concern we should definitely consider in the future of mobility policies and technologies. That's something we are all aware of. Nevertheless, the ICT sector, information and communication technologies, digital technologies, accounts for the 3% of the global carbon footprint. So more than aviation sector, the whole of it. Almost half of it, 45%, corresponding to the energy required to hold up in continuous operation their data centers, containers, and archives of the permanent inflow of data persistently generated worldwide. Digital technologies are also responsible for the huge rise in extraction industries to source metals required to produce electronic devices. What are the limits of the production and the archival of big data would definitely be subject of a whole other conference. Nevertheless, the impact that these processes of collecting, processing, and storing have in our environment walls, whether built or urbanized, should be clearly object of our attention. To conclude, big data and the virtual space of the contemporary metric culture live as well through bodies and physical matter. The enormous volume of information produced, stored, and processed as we speak is housed in massive solid containers. Drawing on the lessons learned from Cerdà, the urban theories, but also the urban planner, what might be needed is that contemporary urban science, theory, and practice engage in the administrative, the political, and the social in conjunction with the material. Thank you.